Well, Baal and Asherah go together. Baal is the sun god, and Asherah is the moon god. Okay? And so Asherah is the cohort, if you will, of Baal. Now, what we have here is a fertility cult. Fertility cult. Okay? And I think you can understand what a fertility cult was. It was so in your face back in that time in paganism that you would have priests and priestesses to these cults that would engage in activities in the temple with people coming in, and that would be the way they would approach God, to have these relationships over a meal with these priests or priestesses. Okay? And I think you know what I'm saying. It was a sexual fertility rite, and it was real. It wasn't an exaggeration. And the scriptures bring these out in several places that this is what it was. Now, if you link all this back, Asherah has many names. This happens to be the Phoenician mother goddess. In Babylon, she was called what?
Isis.
Ishtar. No? Isis is in Egypt. That's pretty good. Okay, Isis is their name in Egypt. Every culture, and we'll bring this up in a little bit. But what we're looking at here, let's see if I can draw a little tree over here. Okay, this is the earth, and this is the tree. Whether it's a pole, whether it's an image of the goddess, or whether it's a transplanted or artificial type of tree, it's called an Asherah. Okay? Now, the pole of the tree, and this is going to be vulgar, but it's the truth, is the male organ in the symbolism. And this is straight out of pagan works. Okay? The earth, we all know Mother Earth. It's not Father Earth in the pagan world. It's Mother Earth. You make the intersection, you understand what it's saying in the message, the fertility cult. Now, we have now talked about what you read in Jeremiah 10, the ways of the pagans of cutting the trees out of the forest and fastening it with nails and hammers. And it says it looks like what kind of tree did it look like? A palm tree. It's upright like a palm tree. It wasn't shaved down to nothing. It actually looked like a tree still. Okay? And so we have that. Now, I can remember as a kid, when we did Christmas trees, we had a little base that was like it was a triangle. You remember that? They have all kinds. They have circles now, but they had a triangle. I know you can't see that; it's below the mic here, but a triangle that the base of the tree would fit in, and you would have 3 screws that would screw in and hold it in. And I think for the most part, there's usually always 3. Okay. Now, this is the way they had some type of form of this, of how they held up these trees when they fastened it in this ancient cult worship. Now, this is called, and I won't elaborate, but I'll just write it down. This is called in paganism the pubic triangle. Okay, and you know, I think I don't need to say anything more than that. And it's holding it up down here. Okay? You see the imagery. And there's no other way to teach this but to tell you the truth. Okay? There's no other way to teach it but to tell you the truth. So we have all that. Now the question is what about the trees we bring into our house? What about Jeremiah 10? What is that tree called? When it says in that verse, you deck it with silver. It's not just bringing a tree, oh, nice little tree, we'll have it here all year long, I'll water you and all that. No, they're with nails, and it's not going to live very long, right? Right. It's temporary. Mm-hmm. Okay? So they deck it with silver and gold, and that has a meaning, which that's part of the things that we can talk to afterwards. So is a Christmas tree an innocent thing, or is it just a modern version of the Asherah?
That's what it is.
Asherah.
And even the witches, pagans today, call it Asherah. Okay? This is why in his word that whenever the male organ is the dominant factor in this system, it's in the masculine plural, but it's a feminine word because God is trying to show this fertility cult and its abomination to him. Because God does not have a cohort. He is not a Baal. The Israelites tried to call him Baal. Now you remember when Elijah had his encounter with the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel? And it's a drought, and Elijah says, go ahead and do your thing and all that to the prophets of Baal and the priests of Baal, and they're cutting themselves, they're doing their war dance and all this other stuff, and the fire doesn't come down from Baal. And if you read the Hebrew, you'll find it kind of entertaining because actually Elijah's mocking them, and he says, is Baal a little bit busy on the toilet? That he can't answer your prayer right now? He's indisposed? That's what it means. And then all of a sudden, there's a drought, and then Elijah builds an altar and sacrifice, and he says, drench it with water over and over and over again. There's a drought going on. And yet the Lord comes down and consumes that sacrifice, showing that he is God. He is God. And Baal is not God. Because the Israelites, the prophets of Baal, were calling God, the Yod-He, Vav-He, another Baal. What was that?
Washington Monument.
The Washington Monument? Well, that's called an obelisk. But it's obelisk. But it's also a phallic symbol. Okay.
Monument to Bill Clinton?
We'll leave that one alone. I'll get in trouble for that.
There's one in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican.
They're all over the place because it's all has to do with paganism. It's in our governments and our symbolism and everything.
In front of the Assembly of God Church.
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
There's one in New York that is named identically the same thing as the one that's in Britain.
Okay.
They're twins.
So twin phallic symbols. Okay. But yeah, it's pretty in-your-face symbolism if you know what's going on. That symbol goes way back into the ancient cultures. You see it in pictures and diagrams and things that were drawn up. Okay. We could go on and on about these symbols that are in the world today of the pagan cultures that's kind of just taken over the world and all the religions, okay? All right. Anyway, I'm going to leave that area of the Christmas. You make your own judgment up on that, but according to the Scripture, a tree that's transplanted and bring it into your house or anywhere is an Asherah. We read that from any tree, so people can't make an excuse that one's not and doesn't fit in that category. The rabbis of old understood that any version of this was an Asherah. Okay? All right? How am I doing on time?
Excellent.
All right. All right, now we come into one of the big ones. Sun God worship. Sun God worship. I want to take you, I'm going to erase this up here to give me a little bit more room. Because you cannot look at Christmas and what it really is unless you look at sun God worship. Right here. All right, I want to take you to the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. What happened there? Nimrod led the people after the flood to build this tower. And no, they weren't building it all the way up to heaven to march on his throne and say, hey, we're taking over. It was, they believed that this was what was called not a cigarette, a ziggurat. Just kidding. And it was an observatory to worship the stars. In other words, what God had created to be signs. Because in Genesis 1:14 through 17, it says that God created the sun and the moon and the stars to be signs in the seasons and all those things. There is a correct understanding of the stars. But the corruption of astrology today is taking a little bit of truth and mixing it with gross lies and making it something that a religion of its own.